Hey guys, happy Friday Eve. How are you doing? I think Double T's being a rascal today. All right, you go over to your corner now. Okay. Oh, so how are you? This week has gone by. This is a broken record. You could probably take a clip of every single one of my streams, and the beginning of it is, where has the week gone? So who's here? Druid, my dear, you were here very early. I got on here early to do my title, and I was like, Druid's already here. And by the way, if you have not noticed on Instagram, I think it was Instagram, Druid is working on a quilt. That's so exciting. I know for a while there, your Sojo was gone a little bit, so I'm excited to see you working on that. I can't wait to see it when it's done. Robin, happy Friday Eve indeed. Mod Art, hello. Oh, and thank you for Mother's Day. Oh no, Druid. Thank you for the Mother's Day wishes. Yeah, I always wonder, is it mothers, grandmothers, anybody who has to deal with a child should get a Mother's Day greeting. Kellen, hi. Word Nerd, hey. I'm so glad you can stop by. Wonderful. You guys. So, today, doing a little cross promotion. So, many of you, I know, do join Jill and me on the quilt nerding thing. And thing. It's our YouTube stream on Tuesday nights. We've been bumping it up to 7 p.m. the last couple of times because we have a real problem ending. we go way over. We always want it to be an hour, and it ends up being longer than that. So it's either at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday nights, depending on, how we get our act together. And Jill is really good about posting about it. So I would recommend follow Quilt Nerding on Instagram or on Facebook or on YouTube. And you'll know when we're doing things. But what we're getting ready to do, we just finished Don Ronigan's Antique American Needlework Tools, which was a fantastic book. And next, we are jumping into Legacy by Nancil Burdick. And this was recommended to us by our dear friend, Mary Kay. And Nancy Lou was a friend of hers. I did double check because I've been bad about saying some of our quilter friends are deceased, and I've been wrong. But I checked. Nancy Lou passed away in 2014. But she leaves behind a legacy. This book is actually about one of her ancestors, and I think it's her great-grandmother, but we will find out because we're going to read about it today. So anyway, she published a paper in Uncoverings, which is the professional journal of the American Quilt Study Group. She published a paper about Talula Gilbert Bottoms, who this book is about, in 1984. So I thought I would read her paper to preface reading this book. So I thought that would be fun. And if you want to join us and you haven't already, the book you can find on Abe Books. It's not super expensive. It's in that what is the category of out of print books that aren't going to break the bank. So I recommend it. And then I didn't know until recently. Where'd it go? There is actually a pattern book if you're into that. There's a pattern book called Family Ties, Old Quilt Patterns from New Cloth by Nancil Burdick, and it is a companion to Legacy. And she literally, in this book, shows some of the quilts. They're made by different people, and I think some of them she just shows Talula Bottoms version. But she references this book. So it's kind of cool to have them together. So anyway, I just wanted to plug our Tuesday night things and get you interested. Let's see. A couple other things. There may be some guests coming up on the stream, so if you are regularly here, thank you. But if you watch the replays, I know not everybody can join me in the middle of the day, but if you watch the replays, definitely keep an eye out, tune in, because I will announce some I can't announce names yet, but there will be some people joining us for eye candy and fun conversations, etc., etc. So keep an eye out. And then I have thrown out there an idea, and I think it's starting to get a little traction. I want to do a 100-day project. And if you're not familiar with 100-day project, it is a thing, like a thing that's got a pretty big following. It usually starts in, I think it's early April, and I never get started on it on time, so I never follow along. But you know, it's basically you do a thing every day for 100 days, and I mean, there is such a wide range of things people do. You know, there's painters and illustrators that do a little drawing every day. There's needlework people that do, say, I've seen people that will start an embroidery and they might graph it off into 100 little blocks and they'll do a tiny embroidery every day. Some people are like, I'm going to try a new embroidery stitch every day. You know, sometimes it's just a little needlework thing. Yeah, you know, like a little collage or something. But what I decided to do was, Dawn Ronigan, as I said, we just finished one of her books. She has this wonderful pattern book of the Mary Witherwax quilt. And she's got this story about, you know, finding the quilt, and she did some genealogy on it and and some research. And I won't give that away because it's that's the beginning. You gotta buy the book to find out. But and I haven't counted them. Jill was, well, I've got a tip for you, Jared. But they're tiny blocks. They're small blocks, and these are like life-sized, like 3.5-inch blocks. And they're applique, and I love applique. So I thought it would just be fun to do this, and anybody who wants to do it along with me, you know, there's lots of different ways you can applique. You don't have to do needle turn, you know, heirloom applique. You can do raw edge applique. You could even stitch these as like embroidery. Jill, I'm forcing her to join me, and she's talking about doing them as red work. And I'll give you the link. Now, there's a possibility, I have maybe asked about a discount code, but I haven't really talked to Dawn about this yet. So I can't make any promises, but keep an eye out for my post. I'm not going to get started until June 1st, so we have plenty of time. But this is the listing. If you want to go look at the book, I think she has it as a digital, so you could buy it as a PDF download too. But just go check it out and see, you know, if it's something that you might want to participate in. I'll post about it in the quilt nerding page. I'll post about it on my channel page, which is public facing. It's, you don't have to log into it. Or the quilt nerding Facebook group, you have to ask to join it, but you know, it's a nice little community. So, but anyway, I'll post about it. So keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in joining along, you know, it's going to be one of those things where I'm not teaching anything. I'm just stitching and you're stitching with me. And, you know, I can provide some tips and tricks and, you know, but really the goal is just to do something and showcase it. So, but to Druid's comment about starting a project as a 100-day project, it can get overwhelming and things happen and you're like, oh, you know, I've missed a couple days. Well, here's the secret. You work ahead. On the days where you're like, this was great, this only took me half an hour, I could do another one. You do that. You kind of have a backlog. And, you know, is it gaming the system? Well, yeah. But from 100 days, you know, we all are allowed a little bit of wiggle room. So that's how I've done 100-day projects in the past. I will actually show you guys another day, one of my 100-day projects. It is one that I finished the 100 days, and then I did a second project, which was an 11-week project that worked on the 100-day project. It was like a spinoff. And that piece of it, I never quite finished. Basically, it was making quilt blocks. And I started off with drawing quilt blocks for the 100-day project. And then I then made quilt blocks. So, and those were weekly because I figured, you know, these were 12-inch or 11-inch quilt blocks. So anyway, I've never put them together into a quilt or whatever, but I do have an idea. So Anyway, we'll get back to that. But, oh, Day said you check the box, even if you only touched it or the drawings. And that it's your project. That's the thing. Like, nobody is like 100-day project policing you. And if you're okay with the, say, idea of like, I can't work on it today, but I'm gonna like keep it, on my radar. I'm gonna look at it. I'm gonna maybe sort it, organize it, or just say like, yes, I'm still in. That counts. Yes, absolutely, Robin. That counts. 100-day projects are like, again, it's sort of about showcasing something, and to me, it's kind of accountability to yourself. Nobody's forcing you, and I like that. I like having a project where I'm like, darn it, I'm going to finish it. So you have a little bit of peer pressure, but you don't necessarily have that, like, locked into somebody else's rules. So what I was going to say about it is, in talking to Jill's like, one a day? I don't know about that. So I'm like, if you want to pick one a week, and take pictures, send them to me. I'll showcase them for you guys. However you want to do it. If you just want to follow along in secret, that works too. But anyway, if you are interested in Mary Witherwax, Dawn actually has a Facebook group for this. So I will get all that published very soon. I just want to put it out there, keep it on everybody's radar if you're interested. So there's that. All right. I think that's everything. Like I said, we're starting Legacy. I've got a whole bunch of other stuff in the works. We're circling back to our experimental archaeology that went awry when we went to Pennsylvania together, and I'm getting back to my piece of making my own batting. And I have many, many things to tell you about that, and I'm not exactly positive when. I'll probably devote a stream to it, because there's lots to say. I'm debunking some things, that people say about handmade batting. So anyway, look forward to that too. All right. Shall we get to Talula Bottoms? So this is from Uncoverings 1984, and I actually have a link to it. The beautiful thing about Uncoverings is that they have all been put on the Quilt Index, which is a project of, I'm terrible which university it's a project of. It's one of the universities, the very quilty universities. And, they've digitized these. In some cases, they're literally just scans of the pages. But they've been made public, so you don't have to buy the journals. Because, some of them you can get, occasionally you can find them online, eBay or Abe Books. But often you can buy some of them directly from AQSG, and they're like $25 a piece. Sometimes some are 10, depends on how old they are. But if you just want one article, or you want to read one thing, and you don't want to, this is terrible. I should be saying, buy all the AQSG stuff. We need the money. But in all seriousness, if you're really just looking for one article, the Quilt Index has them. Now, the only thing is, Quilt Index does not have the pictures. And so if when they wrote their papers, and, here's an example. I printed this off. But you can see there's a blank space where there was a picture. And they did not include the pictures for copyright reasons. AQSG as an organization is in the process of redigitizing to include pictures, and making them searchable. So not just like, I know that Nancy Lou Burdick wrote this paper in 1984 and I can go find it, but literally I can search the text and I can find keywords within her text. So that's like the big project that's happening, now going forward. I'm not sure what the like final date is, but it's a project that's been funded, and I'm pretty excited about it, because from the perspective of quilt study, that's something that's a game changer, to be able to keyword search a database. So anyway, there's a link if you want to go look it up. I want to say they have all of the journals up to like 2000. I might even be later into 2000 now that I think about it. But yeah, they definitely don't have the last decade is not available, but lots more. So I highly recommend if you're interested. to look that up. But let's read about Talula Gilbert Bottoms and her quilts. And as I said, this is AQSG Uncoverings, 1984, paper written by Nancil Burdick. So, two quilts made just 50 years apart, 1985 and 1935, a little book of memories written at age 81, and several boxes of old letters were the materials at the root of this research on my grandmother's quilts. But it was an unplanned visit to the Folk Art Center of the Southern Highland Handicraft Guild in North Carolina, resulting in encouragement by Bets Ramsey. She's still with us. Bets, I think, turns 101 this year. I have not had a chance to meet her, and I desperately want to, because she wrote so much, and I think until recently was still making small quilts. I mean, she's sort of a modernist, so she's an interesting lady. And Sally Garrett, who founded AQSG back in 1980. So it was encouragement by the two of them that made me aware of Talula as a quilter whose story should be told. The two quilts, the feather and the lifeboat, then seemed like parentheses enclosing her lifetime of quilting, just waiting for someone to discover the history between them. Yet evidence from the above materials and from personal interviews, photographs, and letters from the present owners shows that numerous quilts were made after 1935 and that there are yet more to discover. Talula Bottoms, 1862 to 1946, was a delicate little woman who bore 12 children and raised 9 of them, plus 3 orphan children, to adulthood, while doing the work of a Southern farmer's wife without indoor plumbing or other modern conveniences until she was 78 years old. During this time, she pieced as many as, wait for it, you guys, 200 quilts, and quilted most of them herself. She continued to piece quilt tops after the old home was remodeled to accommodate her son's family, leaving no room for her quilting frame, and ceased her beloved work only a few weeks before her death at age 84. I have been able to verify over 100 existing quilts made by her, and more than 40 of which I have seen and photographed. Isn't that amazing? Oh my gosh. I wish, so it seems like Talula Gilbert Bottoms was probably, well, she would have been a contemporary of my great-grandmother. And I know my great-grandmother made many quilts, but none of them exist, so, or still existing that we know of. So this is amazing. She was born on February 15th, 1862, about 20 miles from Atlanta, Georgia, at a time when the South was still hopeful of victory in the Civil War. So she was born, yeah, like right in the middle, like right before the Civil War started. It was like 1863, I think. Atlanta was the chief depot for Confederate military supplies and was therefore a prime target for General Sherman in his march to the sea. Yet the war seemed far away as John Joseph Gilbert and his wife Holly welcomed their second daughter and fourth child into their comfortable Fayette County farm home. It was not until the guns could be heard as Sherman's men approached Atlanta in the summer of 1864 that John Gilbert knew he must take his children and Holly, expecting another child in December, to a safer place in South Georgia. They would return in November, just a few weeks before baby Minta was born, and after the destruction of Atlanta, to find Fayette County devastated, but their home still intact. One of Talula's earliest memories is of that return home by wagon when the children, black and white together, were allowed to eat bread soaked in molasses spilled in the wagon from a broken jug. The ravages of the war and its aftermath included the death of Holly Gilbert a year later when Talula was not yet 4 years old. Her mother's funeral was on Christmas Eve, 1865. Oh my God. Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas. And 7 months later, her father brought home a new wife. Yeah, of course, he can't raise all of his children on his own. Talula had been told that her father would bring her ma home one day. Oh, would bring her ma home that day. That's real nice to tell a 5-year-old, she's probably 5 at that point. Bringing your mother home. Oh, but wait, it's a different mother. The disappointment at not seeing her own mother so disturbed her that for months afterwards, when she would be out in the yard playing, she would go sit on a certain stump that was there and cry for a long time each day, and no one could get me to tell what I was crying about. Oh, I don't know that you necessarily need to interrogate the child what she's crying about. Good gravy. She lost her mother, and she was given the stepmother that she was told was her ma. Ooh, geez. Get it together, people of the 1800s. After the war, economic conditions were so harsh, the children had to pick up the work formerly done by slaves as soon as they were able to hold a broom or wring the heavy work clothes, sheets, and even quilts out of the steaming wash water. For Talula, this was at age 10. After her older sister was married, she would often have to stay out of school to help. Now, I have read this next paragraph. It is horrifying. So this is in Talula's own words. When we would do the washing, my stepmother put turpentine in the little jar of lye soap we had to use to wash. And washing the clothes in warm water with our hands, for no washboards or machines were known in Georgia at that time, we both took a bad case of rheumatism from breathing the fumes. Well, I'm going to say this was not rheumatism, because rheumatism would be like rheumatic fever, rheumatoid arthritis. This is what's happening is neurological damage from turpentine and lye. It's amazing this poor woman lived to be 84. I had to crawl to the fireplace every morning when I'd get up and rub my feet and ankles to get them so I could hobble about. Now, this is a 10-year-old child or a young child. Little sister Minta was in bed, flat on her back, and couldn't get up at all. I never got the pain and swelling out of my ankles until after I was married and got rested being off my feet. I had to be on them so much that they could not get well. Wow. Good old days, huh? The good old days? And you're getting neurological damage from turpentine? Part of that time, I couldn't do one thing to be on my feet. So my stepmother had me card bats for quilting quilts. And this is what I'm doing to make batting. I carded a hamper basket piling full besides some more for one quilt. I don't know how many quilts that one big basket full made, though guess there was enough for several quilts. Soon there were 4 more children in the family, making 10, plus hired men who were boarders, for whom to wash, iron, cook, clean, spin and weave, knit and sew, make a garden year-round, milk the cows, and raise the chickens. Oh, so just a few things. Just a few things she had to do. Whew. No wonder Talula had not been taught to sew, for her stepmother, Anne Eliza, was a meticulous, practical woman, and Talula was now her chief help. Yet even at age 10, Talula had seen the beautiful quilts her own mother had made. And no amount of discouragement or harsh circumstances could prevent the eventual flowering of her talent. I would find needles and pins on the floor where they had dropped them when at work, and I would save them to sew and pin my doll clothes. I kept them in the loft of our playhouse. Aw. My father had built a small house at the well to keep the milk cool, but my stepmother did not use it, so the 2 little girls had it for a playhouse. At the well. Was it beside the well? Was this something where you had to cover the well so the little girls could play in there? My gosh. The dangerous play times and work times the children of the 19th century had. I was large enough to work, but kept my dolls and sewing things there. One day I had stayed up in the loft so long and neglected my work that my stepmother said she would have my brother go up there and throw them down in the lot where the stock would trample them. I began to cry and told her I wanted to save my needles and pins and quilt scraps. She told me to go up and get them then. So I saved them and began to piece on a quilt. Talula seems to have had not a very nice stepmother. My girlfriend gave me a little square she had made and told me to make a square for her. So I pretended to make one, but alas, it was crank-sided. Crank-sided. Some pieces were larger than others, and it was a mess, for I had never been taught to sew anything, though I gave it to my friend, as it was the best I could do. It was a 9-patch square. Then I went to work to make a quilt like the square the girl gave me. When I was through my other work of cooking, washing, etc., I'd piece on my quilt squares when I could, but they were kindly like the first square. That's funny, kindly. That's something my grandmother used to say. Instead of kind of, they say kindly. They were kindly like the first square, though I got enough squares to make a quilt. Then my grandmother helped me put it together. Okay, so she had a decent grandmother. Their stepmother. Though the girl children did not work in the field, they had to help with the ginning by driving the horses to turn the big cogwheel, by dragging the huge hampers of cotton into which the pickers had emptied their sacks up to the gin, and by pulling the lint cotton hampers up to the press. Then, after the day's work was over, it was the children's job to clean the lint room. Now, this is some important information on cotton gins, which I have recently discovered people don't understand how they work. So I will be sharing that very soon. In those days, there would be a lot of the fine cotton that would stick around and up in the roof of the lint room. My stepmother would have that saved to quilt the common everyday quilts with. Though it would be so dusty and dirty, we'd have to put it on the bed scaffold and whip the dust and dirt out of it. Oh my God. Then we'd have to card it into bats with an old-fashioned pair of cards. And if you don't know what she's talking about, it's like a paddle with little teeth, and you card like this to kind of stretch and align the fibers. Kind of looks like a dog brush, like a big dog brush. Then we'd lay every bat one by one on the lining of the quilt to be quilted, which was already laced into the frames. Then the quilt top was put on and sewed down around the edge of the lining. Then the everyday or night quilts were laid off in shells to be quilted. The nice quilts, as we called them, were quilted by the piece and were nicely quilted. I don't know what she means, laid off in shells to be quilted. I don't know. Anne Eliza's exacting standards and Tallula's desire to please her combined to keep her a veritable slave to the family all through her teen years. Okay, Anne Eliza sounds like a wicked stepmother. We can't enslave the Africans. We shall enslave our children. Her sisters and her brother's wife urged her to marry any one of the many eligible young men who were, one after the other, her beaux. Her stepmother highly disapproved of the only one she liked, young Tom Bottoms. Okay, if my stepmother disliked just the one, I would be like, ha, see ya, I'm marrying that guy. So Tom Bottoms, whose widowed mother was struggling to hold on to the family farm. Tom, born in 1860, had been his father's 17th child and his own mother's 8th, and had reached manhood just at the time the Depression following the Civil War was severely undercutting the gains the Southern people had made after Reconstruction. Tom lived with his mother, Eliza McElroy Bottoms, in the old home his father had built in the 1840s, and he was her only support. I mean, this is the unfortunate truth of, like, you know, Civil War widows, you know, whether they lost a spouse or, you know, sons in the Civil War, or just, you know, it was not a good time in the South, as you can imagine. The reason Tallula's family gave for disapproval of Tom was that he had no business sense. No business sense with this one. More important, perhaps, was a not-so-subtle social distinction. The Bottoms women had to work in the field, and the Gilbert women did not. Oh, well, please. But Talula persisted in allowing Tom to come see her, for in her character was a stubborn strength born out of her early hardships, and a sure knowledge of what she wanted. Now, thinking about this, so the Gilberts versus the Bottoms, this kind of went on in my own family. I know that, so my mom has talked to some descendants of her grandfather, a descendant of her grandfather, and their family kind of looked down on my great-grandmother's family for the kind of the same reason. Like, they're all farmers. And some of them, you know, may or may not have enslaved people helping with their, you know, their farming. Some just had, you know, kind of like boarders, basically. You know, men that were kind of itinerant farming hands. And so, you know, in the case, like my grandmother grew up like picking cotton. And so when the women have to work in the field, I guess it's like, it's considered an all hands on deck situation. Whereas if the women don't have to work in the field, then, you're a little bit better off if it doesn't have to be like all hands on deck. So the stories I've heard from my own family sort of parallel this. So early in Talula's memoir, she wrote, "When I grew up, I had lots of beaux, but didn't like them until once a young fellow with black hair and black eyes came to see me, shyly. I had liked him since childhood, and one Sunday, while riding with Tom Hill, just after he had asked me to marry him, we met the black-headed boy riding a pony. Right then and there, I decided I'd never marry anyone as long as he was single, though I didn't know he'd ever come to see me or want me to marry him." Oh. Yet, for nearly 2 years after Tom's proposal, so this would be Tom Hill, not Tom Bottoms, Talula would not give him a firm answer. She explains her uncertainty. "It was hard for me to decide what to do, as I had been told by my stepmother that if I married, I would take consumption and die like my mother and my aunt did." You know what, Annalisa? You are not making friends here. If you marry, you're going to die like your mother. You need to stay here and slave for me. "I was a weakly little girl, and as I got stronger and have lived with the one I liked best to be 81 years old and hope I can live with him longer." Oh, that's sweet. When Tom's visits abruptly stopped, he had split his foot open with an axe and could not walk and was ashamed for her to know it. And she did not hear from him for several months. Talula grew alarmed. She broke with tradition, quite improperly wrote him a note, and the wedding took place 10 days later. It is revealing that not until after her marriage was Talula able to piece an applique, the nice quilts as they called them, or to be free of the rheumatic pain and swelling in her ankles and feet. Now, wait a minute. So she keeps talking about Tom Hill. I'm confused here, but... So 2 years out, so, Yeah, So I guess she did end up marrying this Tom Hill fellow? When did she marry the Tom Bottoms guy? I guess we're going to find out. Okay. So, wasn't until after her marriage that she was free of the swelling in her ankles and feet. I mean, can you imagine being a child? A young person with you've got an edema in your ankles and feet, and you're young. That's crazy. I mean, if you have some sort of illness, or I know pregnancy, all the things that can cause these problems, but my gosh, to have this joint pain and swelling, and when you're young, again, neurological damage. When I got married, I had quilted only one quilt, and I had one top ready to quilt that I had pieced at nights and little odd times. I had always had so much work to do for the family that I had no time for piecing quilts. I loved to piece and work on my quilt work, so I decided to put in every moment of my time that I was not busy at something that was needed more. I'd work on my quilt work when I could get the material to work with. Now this is interesting because the Gilberts, they have a farm. If they had enslaved folk, they do not anymore. They in theory could be paying, formerly enslaved folks. I don't know. We don't have evidence of that, at least yet. But she's working real hard, and essentially her stepmother is basically telling her, you're sickly, you shouldn't bother to get married. But we can read between those lines. Her stepmother wanted her to stay and be a workhorse. This girl's not making her trousseau. She's not making those 12 dowry quilts and then the one bride's quilt. Now, this is the same time period. This is Reconstruction, post-Civil War, that when we read Marie Webster, Ruth Finley, Flo Peto. I've been told it's Peto. Florence Peto. I prefer Peto. But they all write about, women creating their dowries and all this stuff. This was a woman who was not creating her dowry. She was not encouraged to. She was not allowed to, basically. So that's interesting. I mean, you really look, not everybody had the privilege of, planning to become a bride. Within weeks after her marriage, Talula found out her mother-in-law was in imminent danger of losing her farm. She had signed notes that had essentially mortgaged the place to cover losses by an older son in his sawmill business. The debts, though small by today's standards, could not be paid without stinting to the bone. There was talk of letting Mr. Blaylock, who had bought up the notes, have the place, and the family moving as homesteaders to Sand Mountain, Alabama, where people could enter a place by paying $18 for an entry of 160 acres, with sometimes a small house and a few acres cleared. So I guess these are like land grant kind of things, like when you're the manifest destiny and the homesteading. One of Tom's older brothers had already moved there. Talula was heartsick. Finally, she decided to tell her father, who soon paid off the notes, took the farm, and deeded it to Talula. Ew. Uh-oh. The humiliation was hard on Tom, but the improved conditions enabled Eliza Bottoms, a fine quilter in her own right, and Talula to buy new material for quilts. So it sounds like she did marry Tom Bottoms, but I'm just really confused about where in the paper here where Nancy Lou skips from this other guy, Tom Hill, who'd asked her to marry him, and then she meets the other Tom. I'm confused about this. Anyway, all right, keep going. So again, she says, I would get patterns from anyone I could. I even borrowed one quilt from my stepmother's sister. It was very pretty. Then I got the patterns off all my own mother's nice quilts, and one off my stepmother's nice quilt. Oh, so the stepmother could quilt. Yes, because she had, right, Robin? Yeah, I'm kind of confused here because there's two Toms. Like, you know what? I bet we're going to find out when we start reading Legacy. Because I suspect this paper is what led to her to fully write Legacy. So, and that's how things happen, you know? A lot of times when people write these papers for AQSG, like their plan is eventually to write a book. So we know Nancy Lou did. So anyway. But yeah, so stepmother's got a nice quilt because the stepmother had time to make a quilt or had a quilt, whereas poor Talula was slaving away and trying to just stitch her sad little 9 patches. She didn't have but one. That was the orange bud. But my grandmother, Gilbert, told me lots of times that it was my own mother's quilt. Oh, so basically the stepmother's like, here's my nice quilt, the orange bud. And grandmother Gilbert was like, it's not really hers. The drama. Okay. The nice quilts that Talula tells of having made during the first years of her marriage, are ones she herself considered special. The ones she names in her letters and her memoirs from this period, besides the orange bud, are the Road to Texas, Feather, Rocky Mountain, Basket of Flowers, Basket of Pears, Magnolia Leaf, Star and Chain, and Glittering Star. Of these, 6 have been found, and 2 others are thought to be packed away in trunks or boxes in storage rooms, too difficult for the families who have them to get at in their present circumstances. Ooh, that's always worrisome. When you ask somebody and they're like, oh, yeah, it's in the attic, I just can't get to it right now. And you're like, tell me when you found the mouse-eaten thing that we're looking for. So the Rocky Mountain, which there was a picture of, and I suspect we're going to see this when we get into Legacy. I think that these pictures are going to be in there. So the Rocky Mountain probably was Talula's first nice piece quilts, was made, as were all of these early quilts, from patterns she cut herself by borrowing quilts she admired. This one came from her stepmother's sister, Molly Tarpley, later to be her father's third wife. These southern country folk don't mess around. You got to keep a wife. If you lose one, you got to find another one. The Tarpleys had come to Fayette County from Henry County, and no doubt the quilt's name was one was the one this pattern was known by in Georgia at the time. Although most authorities today call it New York Beauty. Okay, so we know New York Beauties are like really pretty complicated quilts. They have like points and angles that are, lots of Y seams. If you're not, if you don't use today's modern shortcuts and things, these were difficult quilts to make. Talula's Rocky Mountain, pieced before 1885 and quilted in 1893, is a striking red, green, and white quilt. Each tiny red triangle cut by hand and joined to quarter circles of green against white to form the 16-inch blocks. The 7-inch wide sash joining the blocks is pieced with red and white triangles on center strips of green. So you can kind of imagine what this quilt looks like. It's the way the blocks come together. It's in quarter circles. They're going to be like big round things with like kind of a sunburst almost looking thing, but red, green, and white, very popular at this time. The points on the sash where the blocks meet and the four corners are emphasized by 7-inch squares of red, into which are pieced small red, green, and white sunbursts. 3 1.5-inch borders of green, red, green at the top and bottom make the quilt size 76 by 85 inches. The entire top is made by hand with the tiniest of stitches, and the quilting is exquisite, creating an overall spectacular effect. And this is something that's interesting. She had that one little block that she tried to make and it was terrible, but she keeps at it, and then she makes this like really complex quilt, and it's described as just spectacular. So I have so much respect for somebody that gives it a try and keeps at it. I know today a lot of times people will try hand sewing or hand quilting, and they're like, they do it once and they're like, not for me. But keep at it and maybe your mind will change. I don't know. Just a thought. The only machine stitching on the quilt joins the pieces of coarsely woven unbleached muslin lining and attaches the red binding. Now, quilted in 1893. So sewing machines were definitely, in households and being used at this time. So what's really interesting is, you'll see a quilt, or, people will look at what they think is an antique quilt and then maybe see, oh, it's got a lot of machine stitching on it. So maybe it's not as old as I think it is. But indeed, in the late 1800s, the sewing machine was patented in like 1840 or some, I think, or kind of the modern version of it that we think of now. So yeah, by like 1875, people were getting sewing machines, and certainly by 1893, sewing machines were a big deal. They were helping people, cut time out of their daily chores, because everybody's clothing had to be sewn. A lot quicker to sew a dress on a sewing machine than it is by hand, because I've done both. The quilting was done by eye measurement following the design of the quilt. No marking is visible, and the quilt has never been cleaned or washed. The basket of pears, called Pear Basket by Talula's granddaughter in Nevada, who inherited it through her father Matt, is an unusual quilt. Its stylized baskets with pieced sawtooth handles contain 1 pear and 2 leaves. Druid. Oh, the peer pressure is going to get ya. And a 120-day project is absolutely okay. A 365-day project spread over 12 years is also okay. Let's see. Stylized baskets with pieced sawtooth handles contain 1 pear and 2 leaves. The same tiny calico prints, one yellow on green, the other white and green on red, which are pieced with white muslin to form the blocks, are also used for the wide red sash that joins them, and for the 3 borders. Can you guess? Oh my gosh, Druid, that's amazing. Over 1,400 days in your language studies. I know you've been working on that stuff for a long time. That is awesome, because I have certainly never managed that. I get about a week into learning like better conversational Spanish. I can insult people really well in Spanish, and that's about all I can do. So good for you. Just because the quilting, you're on and off with it, doesn't mean that you can't stick to things. And I'm proud of you, no matter what you decide to stick to. So as we're describing these quilts, right, we got a lot of red and green, and now we have some yellow. And it's funny, as I was talking to somebody when I was in Temecula, and they were like, you know, people ask the question, well, what led her to choose that fabric? Well, that's all that was available at the store. You go down to the general store and they're like, ma'am, we have this lovely red fabric. We have this beautiful green fabric. We got a little bit of yellow. Oh, and we have white. That's why. If they weren't using clothing scraps, you know, the stuff that you're using, these calico prints, there wasn't a lot to choose from. Hey, Jill. Thank you for that tier 1 subscription. Yes. You know what, Druid? Yes. As long as you're progressing, I think that is a beautiful thing. That's all that matters. So, good for you. I am so proud of you. So, let's see. The quilt has an interesting composition in that the 15 full blocks set diagonally so the handle baskets face the center. Oh. Come out uneven, and the bottom corners are completed with quarter squares, with 9 triangle half squares showing basket handles and pairs around the sides and top of the quilt, and 2 at the bottom. I am very interested to see this. And again, I'm hoping that it's in Legacy. I need to do my reading this weekend, obviously, because we start soon. With its fine grid quilting, the quilt has a subdued old look, showing it has no doubt been put on the best bed for company over the years. It is now with Talula's great-grandson's family in Texas, who also have the star and chain. I just think it's so cool that she knows where these quilts are. And, you know, my hope is, at least at this time and continuing through now, that, you know, because she wrote the book and she did all this research, that the people who have these quilts recognize how important they are, and, you know, that they're still in the family, or maybe they have gone someplace to a museum or other collection. So yeah, these are our hopes for all beautiful quilts, that they are cared for in some way. The magnolia leaf was apparently the local name of a variation of an old pattern identified as oak leaf and reel in American Quilts and Coverlets. That would be our Flo's book. And you know what this looks like. It's like, you know, the oak leaves, and then the thing in the middle is sort of like it's a circle with like kind of a weird little doodad in the center of it. It literally looks like, to me, I don't know, when they say reel, I think they probably mean some kind of reel of, I don't know, spinning wheel. I don't know. But to me, I think of like a fishing reel. It kind of looks like that with like some doodad cutouts in the middle. Anyway. Talula's leaf, appliqued in dark green calico, is slightly wider than those in the quilt pictured in Safford and Bishop's book. The little acorns are more rounded, and the square in the center is the same dark green calico as the leaves, so that the magnolia leaf seems to be laid over the red print reel. This is the only one of Talula's quilts so far discovered adorned with hearts in the quilting. Aw, hearts! It is now displaying its ancient beauty for Talula's great-granddaughter in Ohio, who also has another striking old quilt, intricately pieced by Talula in yellow and red on white muslin in a pattern today known as Chinese fan. This is so awesome that, like, all of these people, you know, have these quilts, and that they know who they belong to. I mean, I guess the family just documented them that well. And I mean, this family's very lucky. Talula's daughter, Molly Ruth, considered the feather the most exceptional of all of her mother's quilts. When sometime after 1915, she and her older sister, Almira, drew straws for this quilt and the Rocky Mountain, Molly Ruth did not draw the one she wanted, nor did Almira. Yet each could see the other's disappointment, so after some hesitation, the exchange was made. Both quilts ended up with Almira when Molly Ruth predeceased her in 1978. But Molly Ruth had already had more than 30 years to enjoy it. The story of the feather is best told in Talula's own words. It's a letter. Dear daughter, yes, I just got your letter. Felt sure of one telling that you got the quilt. Glad it went through all right. Glad you had it sent to you. Know you enjoy showing it. I got the pattern from Sister Susan, Brother George's wife. She made 2 of them, one for Papa's mother and one for herself. Little drink of water here. I haven't been able to get my hydration back since I got back from California. I'm drinking water like crazy. When Mother, and she means Eliza Bottoms, divided her quilts, Mrs. Liza Elmore was there and all the daughter-in-laws. So Mrs. Liza placed the quilts on 5 chairs, as Mother had 5 children. We in-laws all went into the hall, and Mrs. Liza fixed them as she pleased. She placed the feather quilt on the first chair, also other best ones, and then the second best on the second chair, and the next best on next, and so on, until the worst ones were on the 5th chair. Hey, Ivy, how are you? I'm so glad you stopped by. We're reading about Talula Bottoms. So Sister Susan got the feather quilt. Then, after it was all over and the others had carried their quilts away, Mother said to me that she did want Tommy to have the feather quilt, so Tommy got the poorest bunch. They were all very good, but just very common quilts. Okay, so this confuses me kind of what was going on. It sounds like they played musical chairs or something. I don't know what this was about. So the crappiest quilts were on the 5th chair and the best ones were on the... Oh, I see. I missed a sentence. Oh my gosh. Okay. So naturally, the worst ones were on the 5th chair. So naturally, the oldest one was the one who got the first chair and the best quilts. Next oldest got the next best, and so on. Okay, so I missed that. So Sister Susan was the oldest, so she got the feather quilt. And Tommy, the youngest, got the poorest bunch. So I decided I'd get the feather pattern and make myself one. So I soon got the pattern in goods and made it when I was about 23 or 24 years old. Then I kept it with several other nice tops I had made, as we were married 3 years before any children came. So I made nice quilt tops during that time. After the children began to appear, there was one each year for 5 or 6 years. Oh, God bless this woman. And I had my hands full. Well, like, no kidding. You had 6 children in 6 years. The nice pretty tops had to lay away in a trunk until I had a little time to quilt them. You know, and this is interesting how she says this, because we often wonder why, we find pieced quilts and we wonder, like, why didn't they get quilted? And, sometimes the stories come like, oh, something happened to her before she got it quilted, or there was something structurally bad about the quilt top and she decided not to quilt it. But honestly, it sounds like, at least in Talula's case, she was just making quilt tops because it's faster and easier to piece something and fold it away because it's small. And then, you can have these quiltings, supposedly, or you can get somebody to help you when everybody has time. So I would assume that the piecing was happening at night or whenever. And then there was a plan to get these quilted. And so, you can imagine people that make these kind of plans and then have children and never get back to it. So, yeah, I think it gives us a little more perspective. When I quilted the feather quilt, I had 3 little boys, and they liked to play in the yard. But it was funny to them for one at a time to come in and stand by me while I quilted and fan me with a large palmetto fan. That's kind of cute. When one was tired, I had him go out and let another one in to fan me. Now, this is the history of the feather quilt. So while she's quilting it, it was probably pretty intricate. We don't have a picture of it in here, but hopefully there's one in the book. But that's cute. You get your little boys to just take turns coming in to fan you. Because it's hot. It is hot in the South. Talula's feather, circa 1885, is appliqued in olive green, somewhat changed from its original color, and bright red on fine white muslin with a coarsely woven unbleached muslin lining. The batting is a thin layer of hand-carded cotton, and the quilting is done in exquisite scallops, tiny even stitches 10 or more per inch to follow the pattern of the plumes. The applique plumes, 8 to each square, 4 pairs of red and green turned towards each other, are quilted so as to leave a small plume-shaped puff in the center of each one. There are 9 blocks, the 3 center ones being 27.5 inches square, so these are big squares, and the 6 end ones 27.5 by 30 inches, making the overall size 82 by 87 inches. So this is like a queen size quilt or thereabouts, a full size quilt, with these pretty large blocks. And I'm, based on the description, having not seen a picture of it, I suspect it's like a princess feather is what we're probably thinking of. I guess we'll find out when we actually read the legacy book. The quilt is alive with color, texture, and movement. Its only flaw is that it is machine bound rather unevenly, as if Talula was just learning to do that kind of sewing machine work. Or somebody else did it for her. It is difficult to guess whether this was the feather variation of any particular family, for as Talula says, she borrowed quilts from anyone she could. And though Susan Collins Bottoms was the source of Talula's pattern in 1885, it would be impossible to say where Susan's came from. Found among Talula's old quilt patterns was a single brittle sheet, the cover page of a 1928 Southern agriculturalist. Reversed, it shows a picture of the princess feather block and describes another old feather quilt found in a remote country home in Alabama. So, yeah, I think I was right. It sounds like it's a princess feather. Talula's letter to Molly Ruth continues. I had made 5 or 6 real nice pretty quilt tops before any children came to our home. After several years of regular work with the children, I began to quilt the nice quilts, the feather first. So I finally got them all quilted. Then as they married, I gave a nice quilt to each. Ari got the basket of flowers. Matt got basket of pears. Emmett got magnolia leaf. Roger got the road to Texas, I think. Then came the division of the feather and Rocky Mount quilts. So you and sister got them. Burley got the glittering star, I think. Gilbert is to get the star and chain quilt. It isn't as pretty as the others, though I may make them a prettier one, but can't quilt it now. So this is probably how Nancy Lou kind of got a little bit of information on where the quilts went, because she could then, research these family lines and figure out who had them today. That's what's so fun about the, like the mystery work of quilts. When you do have a little bit of information about, the people and where they are, we have access to really, really good genealogical, databases and stuff these days. So it's a little bit easier to research people. The glittering star that Talula mistakenly thought Burley got has been found in a cedar chest in Alabama, waiting for the return from the mission field in Africa of Almira's youngest daughter. So Almira, I'm getting confused about some of these names. Each star of the 30 12-inch blocks is pieced with 3 to 15 different calicos. So now she's got, for glittering star, she's got access to definitely more things, more scraps, more yardage. Each of the 8 diamonds that make up the stars contain 3 calico and 2 muslin pieces, so that the calico points are set apart to give the glittering effect. The quilt contains more than 100 different calicos and has a note attached in Almira's writing. And the writing says, quilt made by Talula Gilbert Bottoms in the late 1800s. 5 other glittering star quilts Talula made later have been found, all except one of which utilize multiple calicos in each star. That one is less interestingly pieced, with only 1 calico and the muslin in each star. Ironically, it is the only one of these that is a planned quilt, made up in coordinating colors, and beautifully framed on 4 sides with a pieced border. These quilts emphasize both Talula's artistry and her frugality, for the tiniest pieces of leftover material were used to create these sophisticated scrap quilts. And she's referencing calico, but I kind of wonder if these scrap quilts are actually clothing scraps versus, purchased fabrics or scraps. More water. Yeah. I did have hot pot yesterday. A little spicy and salty. Instead of the star and chain that Tallulah youngest son was to get, Gilbert and his wife, Mamie, married in 1933 in Michigan, were given 2 very special quilts thought to have been made between 1900 and 1912 after Tallulah. Tom and their 7 children moved to... Okay, wait a minute. Let me say that again. This is a really long sentence. Instead of the star and chain that Tallulah's youngest son was to get, Gilbert and his wife, Mamie, married in 1933 in Michigan, were given 2 very special quilts thought to have been made between 1900 and 1912 after Tallulah, Tom, and their 7 children moved to Sand Mountain, Alabama. One of these was the Dutch Rose, the blocks made of solid deep green and red on a muslin background, with the wide green sash emphasized at block points by small 9-patch squares. Yeah, hot pot does sucks all the moisture from your body. Yeah. But so delicious. It was very lovely. It was so lovely, one must wonder at Tallulah's taking it with her to Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan, where she went in 1912 for treatment of female problems, so serious that she was not expected to live. Wow, okay. We're going to find out more about that in the book, maybe. While she was there, another patient so admired the quilt he wanted to buy it. And Grandma, always generous, was willing to sell. But when the time came for her to leave, the man could not be found, and the quilt came home with Tallulah. The other special old quilt that went to Gilbert and Mamie was the Honeybee, with its deep red and blue-green pieced and applique design set on a soft white muslin background. The patterned squares were put together diagonally with alternating plain muslin squares. Filled with thick cotton batting, the quilt is much heavier and thicker than Tallulah's other quilts, so that one is amazed at the small, even stitches in the 1/2 to 3/4 inch grid of the plain squares. The superb quilting was done by eye measurement, judging from a slight unevenness in grid width and absence of marking. I think a lot of times women sort of did these, just by eye. Although some were meticulous and marked as well, so. It was probably made about the same time as the Dutch Rose, 1900 to 1912. And could perhaps be accurately dated by the unusual solid green and the red, which is deeper than turkey red and tends to bleed, though not to fade. So this would have been one of those non-stable red fabrics, whereas turkey red was stable. And I think madder was more of a rusty red. The scope of this paper does not permit discussion deserved by so many more of Tallulah's quilts, nor of the family, economic, and health problems brought on by World War I, the loss of 2 adult sons, and the onset of the Great Depression, when 2 other sons lost their farms, and there was danger of the old parents losing theirs. Oh. Even when Tallulah began having curious spells in the 1930s, diagnosed as angina, she would rise above it, for she never stopped piecing her quilts. Now, this poor woman, we all have health problems as we get elderly, and, the 1930s, at this point, she's older. 3 Lone Star quilts pieced and quilted by Tallulah in the late 1920s or early 1930s have been found, the material furnished to her by those for whom she was making them. So I wonder if they were commissioned or if it was her family members who were like, make us a quilt, here's the fabric. In 1934, Tallulah persuaded Burley, which is one of her children, I think, to drive her back to Georgia to see once more the places and people she loved. 2 brothers and 1 sister, cousins and friends were still living there, and Tallulah came home ecstatic. And I'm thinking 1934, these may have been people that, unless they were writing letters, they may not have, none of these people may have had telephones. So she may not have had a whole lot of contact with these people, when she'd gone to Alabama. She wrote a letter, alive with detail and excitement, to all my children and grandchildren in the U.S., perhaps to send round robin, for the letter came back home to be put away in Tommy's childhood tool chest where she kept things she treasured. A significant part of that 18-page letter follows. So Talula was a writer, man. So, I mean, she kind of wrote her memoir. So, all right. So October 22nd, 1934. At Johnny Mae's, we saw the old dahlia quilt of my step-grandmother's. So this must have been, what was that woman's name? Ann Eliza. Ann was her stepmother. Then we went to my brother Bud's across the street, and I spent the night with him, for I had not seen him. He was the one that came so near dying in the summer. Well, while at Bud's, I got to talking about the old quilt of my mother's that went to Bud. So Etta got it to show me. Etta must be Bud's wife. And I asked her to let me bring it home with me to try and get the pattern and make a square. So she did, and I have made one square. It is very, very pretty, and as none of us knew the name of it, I have named it the Lifeboat. As the 5 blue corner pieces resemble oars more than anything. The center can be the boat and have 5 oars at each of the 4 corners. It is made in red, white, and blue. So I'm guessing this must be some kind of center design that has 5 things coming off of it, because I can't imagine what this looks like. There is supposed to be a picture in here, but of course, as I mentioned, the copyright of this scanning took out the pictures. The Lifeboat is an exceptional quilt. The 20-inch squares completely hand-pieced, and the calico oak leaf crosses at the intersections of the 5.5-inch muslin sash are delicately appliqued. The 5 blue oars, and again, she means like rowboat oars, at each of the corners are pieced to 4 little tornado-shaped funnels of white muslin. I'm like, my brain is struggling to think about what this looks like. And the tiny red triangles to diamonds of muslin form the boats. A 5.5-inch border of muslin all around makes the quilt's overall size 72 by 84 inches. The execution of the pattern is remarkable, especially considering that Talula cut her own pattern pieces by the old quilt of her mother's. It is understandable she would want it quilted nicely. For Talula, that meant quilting it herself, although she had already begun taking quilts out to Mrs. Brewer to have quilted for her. So Mrs. Brewer must have been a quilter that would help others. She seems to have considered this one a special challenge, as if to prove to herself that she could yet do the fine quilting she had done when younger, and it is indeed a masterpiece. You know what? I got to figure out what this looks like. I'm just going to look. If it's in here, I'll show you. Let's see. Actually, you know what? It might be in the pattern book. Of course. Oh, here we go. The Lifeboat. 39. Let's see. Okay. I would not have guessed that this is what it looks like. It's actually on the front of this. It's on the front of this book, so I'm not spoiling anything. It is this one right here. So you can see what she's talking about. The 5 little things in the corners, and then the boats, and then there's these kind of oak leaf intersections in the sashing. It's not what I imagined, but that's cool. I like it. It's a cool, really cool pattern. Letters from winter, spring, and summer 1935 show Talula, now 73, alive to every personal, family, and community event, every joyous sight and sound of returning spring and bountiful summer, with only an occasional, unspecified reference to her quilting. Though there is talk of having to put our place up for sale, for if we miss one payment, the land bank will take it, Talula shows no alarm, and by October she has put the Lifeboat in her frame. I have to be very busy these days to get as much done on my quilt as I can before cold weather comes. I cannot go up to quilt when it is very cold. If I go up now, we'll have to wrap up good. Having have been wrapping the old overcoat around my feet and around my lap, though we'll have more wrapping if I go up tomorrow, I think. Talula's quilting frame was set up in the big upstairs hall, 12 feet wide, probably designed for her frame when the house plans were drawn up by George, the brilliant son who died in a Georgia Army camp in 1918. So that's interesting. The hall was hot in summer and cold in winter, for the only heat in the house was from the downstairs fireplaces and the kitchen stove. But Gilbert remembers she almost always had a quilt in her frame. On October 12th, in a letter to Molly Ruth, she wrote, "I have been working hard on my quilting while the weather is nice. I have my quilt about half out, I think. If so, I can get it out in 3 more weeks if I keep well and weather is so nice so I can stay upstairs. It is very pretty, and I am trying to quilt it. Nice, though my fingers get so very sore and my wrist and hands get so tired." Well, I mean, she's 73, I would imagine arthritis, and that cold weather. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys suffer from it, but I know, like, in the winter, my hands are cold. I have a real hard time, like, hand sewing. "By the time I rest them until Monday, we'll be ready to go again as fast as I can. Have already used over 300 yards of thread. That is of the white thread, though not much of the red, as I do not quilt much in the red." From these letters, it appears that Talula quilted the lifeboat in about 6 weeks and used more than 600 yards of thread, the red only to outline the oak leaf crosses. On the quilt's lining are the badges of her victory, several small blood stains, and one so large she had tried to rinse it out. Poor woman. Yeah, and it's 40 degrees in her house, right? Well, I mean, I understand that because I live in a house that, we have baseboards now, and they heat the upstairs, but for probably the first 15 or 18 years I lived in my house, we only had the boiler that forced air, and we had 2 vents that got the air upstairs, so we had space heaters upstairs for the longest time, and yeah, that you keep everything closed up, obviously, to keep the heat in the rooms that you're heating. So the hallway is terrible. Freezing cold. You, run up and you run down in the morning. My hallway is nowhere near what Talula's is, though. My hallway is, very narrow and tiny. So, anyway, I feel her pain. Yes, and the poor woman, the blood stains. Oh, gosh. Pinned to the quilt is a note in Elmira's writing, "The Lifeboat," made about 1936 for Molly Ruth by Mother, Talula Bottoms, and quilted by her. Another lifeboat soon followed the first one, not quite so intricately pieced or quilted, but perhaps more striking with its solid red boats, blue oars, and pieced peach and blue sash emphasized with 9 patch squares at intersection points. It was made for Elmira and remains in her Alabama home with her youngest son's family, who inherited both the quilt and the home. Talula's lifeboat will be recognized as a variation of an old pattern today called Whig's Defeat, an 1850 example of which appears in Safford and Bishop's book. An earlier example, and one more comparable to Talula's and from nearer her locale, is described by Betts Ramsey in Uncoverings 1980. She suggests in this article a relationship between the frugality of Southern rural people, necessitated by harsh conditions after the Civil War, and a certain healing resourcefulness. Without doubt, Talula's self-sufficiency was crucial in what appears to be the healing effect of her completion of the lifeboat, and her chosen name for it was probably significant. Oh, I didn't think about that. That's interesting. Yeah. Interviews and the exuberance reflected in many letters from this period verify that from the mid-30s until shortly before her death in 1946, her production was near incredible. So she's in a good place in her elder years, and she's quilting like a tornado. Talula would often have a dozen or more quilts in progress. The pieces cut and kept in their individual Mars candy bar boxes, or candy boxes, which she had persuaded the proprietor of the traveling store, from whom she often bought material, to save for her. When a particular quilt she had made was so grandly admired, she would make 2 or 3 or 6 or 8 more like it. Wow. I mean, honestly, if I make a quilt, a big one, I'm done with it. I'm not going to make more. Unless I mean, I'm sure I could be persuaded in some way, but yeah, I'm not one to keep making the same thing over and over. Often she would let her granddaughters arrange the blocks on the big feather bed opposite the fireplace beside which she sat to piece her quilts. She kept many quilts and tops, folded away in a big round-top trunk to give to nieces or grandchildren when they were married, to send to relatives when they were ill, or simply to give to friends or neighbors or anyone to reward them for some generous thing they had done. Oh, that is sweet. I mean, like, quilts were her love language. 3 such quilts have been discovered in the Athens, Alabama area, where Talula and her family moved in 1912, and it is possible many more could be found in Athens, Cullman County, and Fayette County areas. For more than one grandchild saw her simply give a quilt to someone who fell in love with it. Now, I'm wondering if she signed her quilts. Because, I mean, unless there's some other type of provenance, like a letter, or, you know, the people that received the quilts documented them, I'm wondering how these were discovered. In the late 1930s, she donated 3 quilts to be raffled to buy land for community building because many people in the area had no place to worship. Numerous letters from 1935 through 1945 show Talula not only working on several quilts at a time, but making rugs, repotting porch and house plants every March, and growing yard and garden flowers so profuse and beautiful strangers would stop to admire and photograph them. Good for Talula. A few letters indicate she was being asked to make quilts on order for people as far away as West Virginia and New York who had seen quilts that had migrated there with her children. Interviews verify that she did indeed during this time complete her goal of appliquing little girl quilts for each of her 15 granddaughters. 15 granddaughters, and she made little girl quilts for each of them. Wow. Sometimes making them very special by sewing on the buttons of Dad's baby dresses. Wow. It's amazing. One of the quilts Talula continued to make throughout the 1930s was the Garden Bouquet, as a Nancy Page design by Florence Leganke, which ran as a weekly series in the Nashville Banner, February through July 1932. And I have seen this one before. I mean, you can look it up. It's I'm trying to remember. It's appliqué, yeah. So it's like a floral thing with birds. One of the first garden bouquets Talula made was for Molly Ruth. It is now with her nephew's family in Alabama. Its delicate appliqué birds and flowers, its fine quilting outlining the patterned squares, with the alternating plain squares quilted in a grid, and its unusual pieced urns and Greek key border so pleased Talula and everyone who saw it that she set about to making one for each of her 8 living children. Don't you wish you knew a quilter who you could just say, you know what, I love that, and they'll just make you one? I think most of us are so time pressed. We're like, I'm glad you like it. Please take a picture. Take that with you. She was still making these quilts in 1939 and possibly into the 40s, verified by a little rectangular template she had cut for the border from a postcard received from her older daughter. 6 garden bouquets have been found, 4 quilted by Talula and 2 unquilted tops. Man, this lady was prolific. Talula had clipped and saved the complete series of patterns and instructions, 20 different flowers, 2 birds, and the urns and the Greek key border. I have it too. I downloaded it from newspapers.com. The brittle yellowed sheets were found after Almira's death in 1980. To each flower pattern, Talula had pinned the little tissue paper templates she had cut for her own use. These are heavily perforated with pinholes, showing she had used them many times. Gilbert and Mamie inherited one of the later ones she made, an unquilted top. On it, the hand stitching of the urn triangle, half of the squares is of uneven quality, and the Greek key border is unevenly pieced by sewing machine, attesting to the effects of aging on Talula's hands and eyes. That she would resolve to make 8 of these quilts with the delicate laid work so perfectly executed is just one example of this little woman's great talent and generous heart. One of the last quilts Talula mentions in her letters is Around the World. She completed the top in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I mean, a trip around the world is, it's not difficult because they're just squares, but the color work, you have to like plot it out. So that's pretty amazing too. In 2 weeks. Let's see. She completed the top in 2 weeks, and Papa likes it so much he wants to have it quilted and he keep it. So I'm assuming when she says Papa, is she meaning her husband? I'm not sure. Other letters tell about her curious spells, one so severe she seemed gone for sure, but often end with, but I can still do my quilt work. Or, I may make a good many quilts yet if I can keep my strength. A 1943 entry in her memoir says wistfully, I sometimes wish I had them, meaning her quilts, all here once more so I could see them. Almost everyone interviewed remembers Talula sitting beside the fireplace, piecing quilts in her little homemade straight-back chair, cushioned with 2 or 3 pillows, her quilting closet nearby filled with bags and boxes of scraps and new cloth, sometimes whole bolts bought for her, mail-ordered or bought off the truck, as well as the boxes of cut pieces neatly arranged to lift off their little stacks. On warm days, she would sit in her small rocking chair on the front porch beside Tommy and his big one. She would have a 3 Musketeers box on her lap. I think Talula liked the candy. Or maybe these were just perfectly sized boxes. Lifting off the little pieces with unbelievable speed and placing the finished squares in a basket beside her chair. While Tommy rocked and reminisced, or reflected on religion or the state of mankind, she would rock and sew, nodding in agreement and occasionally saying, yes, Tommy, you're absolutely right, Tommy. Does that sound like she's humoring somebody and just really keeping her mind on the quilting? I've never done that before. When company came, as it frequently did, she would get up and greet them warmly, making sure they were comfortable or fed, then sit again and sew while visiting. Aw. I mean, she just sounds like a really nice person. She did not walk. She trotted about her work. She knew how to work without a wasted motion or a wasted moment. Skills she had no doubt had to learn as a child and a young woman if she were to have any time left to piece quilts. She moved about her work with quick little steps, humming old hymns, waiting on Papa and her grandchildren, all of whom she called Honey Dear. Aw. No one ever heard her raise her voice or complain. One granddaughter said, I envisioned her as an earthly angel. She was so fragile, her voice soft, her face sweet, and always smiling, even when she was in pain. Oh. Reading all her letters chronologically, one is impressed with the life-giving quality of her joyous craft. On June 21st, 1941, she wrote, I started to be a little girl again yesterday. I was out of the kind of cloth I was using in the quilt I was working on. So I got out patterns of one I had made when a little girl and started on it as I had scraps. It is now 5:30 and we are through in the kitchen, though the others are not up yet. Okay, 5:30 in the morning, perhaps, if the others are not up yet. She must have felt very rich indeed in these later years, for her sharp mind and her hands twisted with arthritis continued to create, often in complex and difficult patterns, to the end of her life. She was thus able to be generous with this wealth of her own hands until her peaceful death at age 84. So, oh, Talula. I love her. I can't wait to read the book. She seems like a wonderful person. So, Nancy Lou has in her notes and references, Talula Gilbert Bottoms' memoir, written in 1943. This memoir, autobiography of Talula Gilbert Bottoms, was privately published with an introduction and notes by Nancy B. Burdick, granddaughter. So, and a copy of the handwritten memoir has been placed in the Margaret Mitchell Library in Fayetteville, Georgia. So, that's interesting. That's something that's out there. See some of her other notes. This is interesting. I like when people have like extra info in their end notes. So she talks about, remember one of these quilts had been bound by hand, or I'm sorry, bound by machine. She says this quilt may have been bound with a sewing machine turned by hand. On pages 20 and 21 of her memoir, Talula describes such a machine and says, I used that machine of theirs after we were married. So this maybe was from her husband's family. The feather and the rocky road appear to have been bound about the same time, possibly several years later than they were quilted. Among Talula's letters was found a receipt and guarantee for a standard sewing machine, Cleveland, Ohio, sold to T.J. Bottoms on November 9th, 1895. She bought a sewing machine in 1895, or her husband bought it. So, very cool. Let's see if there's any more notes here. The little girl quilts. They were Colonial Girl, Dutch Doll, and Sunbonnet Sue. As I suspected. That was a letter from Estelle Fernandez to Nancil Burdick. So I'm wondering if Estelle Fernandez was maybe a friend. Or maybe she's one of these granddaughters. How cool. Let's see. Oh. So the postcard from which she had cut a template. Okay, there are pictures of them in the legacy book. Oh, awesome. Yeah. As you see, I have obviously not even flipped through the legacy book yet. So the postcard from which the heavily perforated template was cut reports the death of her nephew's child this morning. The child died in April 1939. That is sad. It's an odd thing to use as a template, but okay. Okay, and then here's this last note. It says, Talula's granddaughter, Martha Hammock of Punta Gordas Islands, Florida, inherited several of Talula's unfinished quilt tops and several boxes of her cut pieces from her mother, who had received them from Talula before her death. One star quilt Talula had begun and Martha has just completed has a large flower piece to each star, its gathered petals filling up the center so that the star points look like arrowheads. The same pattern is called Dahlia in Dorothy Fager's The Book of Sampler Quilts from 1983. Among other quilts, the pieces cut or tops unfinished are Double Wedding Ring, Pilot's Wheel, Glittering Star, and Improved 9 Patch. The last year or two of her life, she made at least 15 quilt tops in easier patterns, hand-pieced with larger pieces and longer stitches. 8 Grecian star and 7 sunflower quilts made during this period have been found, both patterns of which require sewing of unusual shapes and curved pieces. So this lady was not afraid of just jumping right in there. So, okay, so you saw them while you were looking for the lifeboat quilt. Yeah, the lifeboat quilt is interesting, and let's see, let's flip through here and see if we can find that one and look at it a little more detail. It's called Wig's Defeat. So 68. So the person that made this for the book is called Faye Jorg. Her last name is spelled Joerg. She made this in 1990. So this is what hers looks like. And that's really pretty. It's made with, white fabric, and then this, is that like, it's like a big floral print. Actually, I thought it might be batik, but no, it's just a really bright print. And then I think this is the original, right? Yeah, it's the original. And then looks like Faye made another one in a different color. So that's another one of Faye's. But my gosh, look at that diamond. The boats have this like very, very, I mean, they're triangles that make diamonds, right? And oh goodness, yowza. So I guess each block would be made in quarters. I'm trying to see. I don't know. That's how. Oh, okay. So I guess you're supposed to. These are cut on the fold, maybe, because I see there's a fold line. So they're not actually pieced in quarters. But I mean, look at these pieces. Those don't look too difficult. But look at that. Look at the boat. You gotta make that? Yowza. I'm just trying to think, like, that's just some complex piecing there. I was just trying to think to myself, I guess you could, like, one of the modern ways of piecing this maybe would be to kind of cut this in half, in half lengthwise, and then piece each of the diamonds like on a foundation and then put them back together. But I mean, nonetheless, it's a curved piece. So, and you have to get it married to this big old honking thing. I could see myself making one block and then being like, make a whole quilt? Well, the heck with that. Yeah, it appears that Talula loved a complicated quilt. I mean, oh my gosh, look at this one. So, yeah, these are pretty amazing. I'm really looking forward to getting into her, like, the full-blown story, because, I guess, so when Nancy Lou wrote the paper was, like I said, 1984, and she published these books. Let's see, the pattern book was published in 1991, and I think, it fell over. I think this was the same year. Let me see. Maybe it was 1990. Oh, no, this is 1988. I'm sorry. So this was 4 years after she wrote the paper. And then this one's another 3 years later. So she was continuing her research. So my guess is the paper, she located a bunch of quilts. And then I think by the time she wrote this, or put this together, she likely had good pictures and more to work with, is my guess. So that is amazing. I can't wait to read the book. And I hope you guys are interested in reading the book now, if you aren't already. I know, sounds like Robin's already got it and ready to go. So that's really all I had for today, guys. Like I said, it's been a crazy week. Jill tricked me into adding another stream, which if you guys saw last night, hopefully you got a chance. If you haven't, check it out. We've started this Needlework Nights stream, and it's going to be every other Wednesday. And we realized, when we were reading Don Ronigan's book, Antique American Needlework Tools, that we really love sewing notions, and who doesn't? Like, we all, as quilters and stitchers, probably have a good number of notions. Certainly more than our foremothers had. They had a needle and thread and some fabric and some paper that they had to save the back of a postcard to use, for their patterns. I mean, today at least, we have a sewing machine and nicer things for making quilts. But if you look back over the years, there's all kinds of interesting things and beautiful things. So we realized that we couldn't stick to just Dawn's book. We had to look at all of the non-American, antique and vintage needlework tools, and maybe even some new ones, just for unique or as a comparison. Because one of the things we said was, nowadays a lot of tools are very utilitarian and functional, which is great. You know, it's nice to have tools that are sturdy and work well, but they're not always necessarily pretty. You know, I mean, we gave the example of like cards of buttons. You know, if you need to go buy buttons, you've made a top or something that you need buttons for, and you go to the store to buy buttons, they just come on a white card, you know. But back in the day when people sewed a lot more clothing, you know, just plain white shirt buttons were, I mean, everybody made them. So what was going to differentiate between, you know, this company and this company was they're really cute, like lithography on, you know, on the cards. So things have changed, and we're really interested in looking at that. So that's what we're doing every other Wednesday night. If you missed it last night, it's on the replays on YouTube. We started with shoe pin cushions because we are very enthused about those. And Jill had some really cool ones. She also has 2 for sale. So if you're interested in starting a little collection of shoes, shoe pin cushions, or adding to a collection, check out her Instagram. It's J.A. Antiques and Vintage on Instagram. What was I going to say? Oh, so week after next, which will be May, I can't remember the date. Will be May 22nd will be our next needlework night. We're going to do embroidery scissors. And if you have some interesting embroidery scissors, you want to send us a picture, quiltnerding@gmail.com, or I don't know that you can upload pictures here in the DM, but I know you can on Instagram and Facebook. So you guys know where to find us if you want to share any pictures. And yeah, we'll put them out there. So 2 other things that are coming up here. I mentioned that there will be some interviews maybe, or people joining me. I don't have it all squared away yet, but look for that in the future. But what I want to do next week, either Monday or Thursday, it kind of depends on something else I'm trying to fit in there. I think I'm ready to do a quilt study day. So I know a number of you have sent me quilts, pictures, and if you have not and you would like to, I totally forgot to pull up. Let's see. The form. With this one. Bear with me. Nope, it's not that. Okay. It's the Quilt Gossip submission form. So if you have not, let's see, how do I share this? I think there's an easier way to share this, but okay, I'll just put this in the chat. So that is the form if you would like to submit or share a quilt that you have. It doesn't have to be, you know, like anything super special, just one that you think is pretty. Needs to be made before 2000. That was the only limitation I put on it. It needs to be at least 24 years old, if not older. So yeah, upload some pictures, show us what you got. And we'll do that either Monday or Thursday next week. So I think that is going to be it for today, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Good things for Friday, good things for Saturday and Sunday. I know I'm looking forward to it. I think that, well, this weekend, of course, is Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. And I think it's Preakness this weekend, or maybe Preakness is next weekend. Usually we get out of town because Preakness in Baltimore is insane. But oh my gosh, Word and Bird Nerd. Well, happy birthday to him. And good for him. 80's a good age. I hope to be 80 one day and you know, be kicked back enjoying life. Yeah. So, camping. Well, you have a good time. Hope you have good weather. And yeah, that'll be fun. All right, you guys. Well, have a good weekend, and I will see you on Monday, as per always. Thank you so much, you guys. You are treasures. I love you guys so much. I so appreciate you. I couldn't do this without you. So whether you subscribe or you suffer through commercials, you make this happen. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So enjoy. Have a good afternoon, and I'll see you soon.